everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Joe Moore here, and today we're joined by the Heroic Hearts Project team, both Jesse Gould and Zach Riggle. How you guys doing today?
Doing good. Have the election fatigue as everybody else. So,
Ugh.
and then the conference fatigue as everybody else in the psychedelic space.
Yeah, it's been a lot. So I guess worth noting, we're recording this on November 9, and it's the day after some pretty substantial elections, and in Colorado specifically, Prop 122, where it's looking like psilocybin mushrooms and a few other things will be decriminalized immediately, and a legal framework created within 2 years for psilocybin-containing mushrooms. So it's going to be a fascinating ride from here. So let's first, but for people who don't know, let's talk first about Heroic Hearts Project, and we can get into the details.
So we're a nonprofit organization working with veterans. Our primary mission is to create a healing community centered around access to psychedelic treatments. So for those who are struggling with PTSD or military sexual trauma or other combat-related traumas, really we just try to provide them an opportunity to seek some healing centered around plant medicines.
That's great. Yeah, and you've been active for a long time, Jesse. I think we met up in Denver. Was that 4 years ago now, maybe?
It's been a journey. We started, I think, about 5.5 years now. Early 2017, which I heard somebody say psychedelic years are like dog years, and it definitely feels like that on a lot of fronts. But so it's cool. There's been people in the space far longer, but I think there's a new generation of psychedelic practitioners who have taken up the torch, and it's cool to see just from the 2017 it is night and day of what it was in the veteran space and the general space. The very fact that we're looking at these ballot initiatives, the very fact that politicians are talking about psychedelics, that just coming from these conferences, such prominent researchers and various people, it's pretty heartwarming. It's pretty cool, but there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that.
Right. It's it's a massive footprint Heroic Hearts is taking up right now, and I love it. But it has to be a lot for you to handle. But what I've seen is you've really done a great job building your team. I've seen, you launched your UK, I don't know how you would call that, partner org, maybe?
Yeah, it's like a branch. So we have a branch in UK, we have a branch in Canada. We all operate under the same message and same ethos, but they
Yeah.
are essentially independent. They have to be that through legal structures, but I've been fortunate. I mean, it's sort of more a testament to the space of, I think if you do the right thing and you go forth responsibly and ethically and with integrity, that the right people find you. It's not like I have any magic skill or charm or anything like that. And so I've been fortunate. We mentioned Kate Pate earlier. She was on the team. Zach obviously here, and then this is such a unique space in terms of, because it is so effective, it touches so many different lives. And, still at this point, most of the people in the space have been affected themselves or they've seen family members. So you just get, amazing crew of people who are at the top of their professions and willing to donate their time, willing to give their time, willing to take pay cuts just for the sake of doing something of importance and moving this forward. Just the other week, I was on a panel with a former 3-star general who essentially had all the last few presidents on speed dial. And I'm not sure if he's gone through it himself, but he definitely had family members that it touched. But that's just sort of the aspect of the space that I don't think you really see in any other places, which is also why it's moved so quickly, I think.
It's so compelling, and the amount of change that can happen is so incredible. So yeah, like what are we seeing now? Are you seeing like a lot more interest in the last year or so? Is it accelerating for you as well?
I think it's largely just conversations, people willing to talk about it. So even just a few years ago, it was you'd see someone or they find out about you and they'd be really struggling, and it'd kind of be like, hey, psst, I know a guy who might know a guy that can maybe help you. And that's largely how we had to conduct operations. People were really concerned about, what if my family finds out? What if my job finds out? And thankfully, it's just become more and more mainstream with people sharing their stories and their success stories that um, I think it's just been a lot more acceptable than we expected, which at the same time now means demand is growing pretty significantly, and there are a lot of other things that are kind of coming up in other places, and it's how do you ensure quality across the board and try to make sure that people are um, getting adequate preparation and integration work surrounding the psychedelic treatment itself. So there's a lot to it. It's great that access is increasing, but it also that comes, as Jesse said, with some more risks and responsibilities.
Right. And that's a really big question. So I know historically there was a lot of ayahuasca use as part of the heroic hearts programs. I heard rumor it might have shifted a little bit, but like how, before we even go into specifics there, like how are you looking at quality and safety there? Because that is obviously a really big priority if we want to keep doing this for a lot of folks.
We're always honored to be part of rumors. So, um, it's tricky, right? Especially from the get go. It was the established medical system was clearly failing in a lot of ways, and the only real options based off of early research and just a tremendous amount of anecdotal research seem to be coming from psychedelics. But one, with the stigma, and two, with the lack of infrastructure because of the laws, because of all sorts of different things, there was no establishment, and you kind of have to like lurk in the shadows. The way we're able to operate is because we connect veterans to countries where this is legal, and that in itself is an endeavor. But then building this structure of support to where they can come home and have other people to connect to, but then also intake, also coaching, all these things we've had to build from the ground up because these industries did not exist for psychedelics. And it's not like we have VA funding or Ford Motor Company sponsoring us. It's really been sort of a grassroots kind of thing, and figuring it out too, as safe as possible. It's not just we're just dosing people and like, hey, how was that? Really taking things very slowly. The people on our team going through, that's one of our things is we will not recommend something we have not gone through. We will not recommend healers or centers that we have not attended ourselves or have very trusted. And so then that way we can speak with some sort of authority there and really listen to the elders and listen to the indigenous people of what they're saying. They're the knowledge holders, and that's where our respect always lies. So I think there's a benefit starting with ayahuasca because that, I think, of the psychedelic spectrum as we know it here is really really respectful, really relying on this indigenous knowledge, and there's a lot there. But yeah, we've always taken special care in terms of who we're serving and how we're serving it, and what makes sense. It's not the more psychedelics for the more people, the better. It's let's see what our left and right limits are, and let's work within those limits. And if we're able to expand it as we get bigger and build the infrastructure, so be it. But let's really focus on who we feel confident we can help, and that's also why we've dedicated so much time to the preparation, the individual coaching, the retreat centers, the aftercare, the integration. Because this is a cliche now, even though everybody says like, oh, you might not know integration's the most important part, but everybody I think knows that all of these things on the sideline are fundamental for this experience to last.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's great. I'm glad that there there is that much intention put into it. We had a really bad situation at a retreat ages ago, and that like pulled us back from endorsing anybody for many years. And right now we can only really endorse one spot, which is really tragic. Someday
Yeah.
we'll catch up. but that's great that you're doing it that way. And yeah, and ayahuasca like does seem to have a really great safety profile, especially when we do appropriate screening and prep. So it seems like a really solid pick. So glad to hear
And
that too.
if you work with healers that know what they're doing, because I've had the same sort of thing. I've vetted a ton of different, domestic retreats, international retreats, and not all centers, not all healers are you're going to get the same experience. One is just sort of a part of tradition or part of protocol. There's different ways, and they might not all be sort of trauma focused, but otherwise, as it is expanding, as you can expect, there's going to be people who call themselves healers who may not have the experience, the pedigree. And it's not on us, two white guys or the rest of our team to say this is a true shaman or this is how you do it. But it's on us to do sort of a risk assessment and have relationships with healers that we know have the experience and that are experts, that are maestros in their profession. And it's a relationship. And that's also what ayahuasca teaches us. It's, healers can refuse to work with you, if, especially if you're working with them on a constant basis. And so oftentimes before you even start the relationship, you sit in ceremony with them and they kind of see where you're at and vice versa. And if it fits, then it should be that relationship. It shouldn't just be, there's transaction involved, but it shouldn't just be, here's your money, like this is what I ordered kind of thing. And so I think that should be the same with any sort of group.
Kind of a key part of our due diligence process with the retreat centers or the healers is helping them to understand this isn't just a one-sided interview. It's making sure that they understand our program fully, what it is that we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, and make sure that they're aligned with that. And we go back and forth and ask each other questions and work together for quite a while, usually, before we actually pull a trigger and initiate some sort of a relationship, because we want it to be a lasting relationship. And working in an unregulated, unstandardized or non-standardized medicine, it's based almost completely on trust, and we want them to trust us and our intentions as much as we're able to trust theirs.
That's fantastic and really important.
And it's been kind of a cool thing I've seen with a lot of healers that we've worked with is it's become commercialized, and there's no, everybody deserves healing and stuff like that, but a lot of them cater to people in normal walks of life who definitely have their own trauma and all this kind of stuff. A lot of veterans, for the most part, do have a very intense sort of trauma, a lot of darkness, for lack of a better word. And so a lot of the healers we worked with, when they go through their first veterans group that we organize, like they're excited to work with us again, because it's like they're in their full force, doing what they do, and they see sort of in the veteran, generally speaking, veterans go in, they follow like the diet, they follow the rules of like, okay, how do I do this? They go deep in, and so I've seen this a lot with healers. Like they're excited to like work with this group.
That's fantastic. I love that. Zach, you had this line earlier about people letting something get a little bit too bad before they seek help. Can you maybe like lean into that a little bit? Because I'm sure there's at least a couple people that are going to listen that maybe let it get a little too bad.
Yeah, it's just the general question, at what point do we ask for help, right? And I think just as a society, we feel like things have to be in full on crisis before we need to seek some sort of assistance. And we want to put out there that doesn't have to be the case. That if you're able to look at your life and realize that there may be some areas where things could improve and you might need some help in improving them, then don't be afraid to reach out, because we're not going to turn you away. And maybe ayahuasca isn't the right thing, or plant medicines in general aren't, or psychedelics, but we can still have a conversation with you and explain some other stuff about community and meditation and mindfulness, and just provide some other tricks and tips that could possibly help people out. Because it's a good thing. And Jesse mentioned it's a good thing, or how the healers like working with us, because when there's something that's really, really messy, it feels good to see how much you could fix it. Yeah, that is a good thing, but not everything has to be a disaster, right? And I fully believe that psychedelics and these medicines can help improve the state of a lot of people, not just those who are who are at the deepest, darkest bottom.
Yeah, and what people should understand is like ourselves, other veteran organizations like Veterans of War, vets, we're all like in a triage state, right? Like by the time people come to us, oftentimes it's like their last ditch effort. They're at their end. They've tried everything. They've been on all the medications. They've been in therapy for decades, and all throughout that process, the hope slowly diminishes. And just put yourself in the mind of, especially years ago, of somebody just googling like what can help me, what can save me, PTSD, and then 10th down on the scroll is this crazy veterans doing ayahuasca. Like what mindset puts you into signing up for that, right? And so we're in this triage state where all the people, or a huge percentage of the people, are coming to us with built-in trauma for years and years, and we're fortunate that some of these substances can be very effective for it, but we can be so much more effective if we hit it much earlier, or if we don't allow people to get to that such traumatized state, and it does become progressively harder. We've worked with some Vietnam vets, and you do bring them peace, but it's 40, 50 years of guilt and potentially addiction, and the laundry list of trauma, and a week is not going to completely erase all that.
Right. Right. They'll have to go back probably a couple times, and that's hard. It's hard to make it happen. It's hard to like even get that ball rolling, right? You see folks in their 60s and you're like, "Oh, geez, you really need to start checking in." Like hopefully. And yeah, I'm glad you're doing that work too. That's amazing. Um yeah, I the medical system has gotten a lot of things wrong. I think one of the hallmark things I've learned in my research, and maybe Jesse, you clued me into this, is there's a lot of misdiagnosis too. So brain injury being treated as PTSD, and that's horrifying. And I'm kind of curious if there's been any headway made on that particular talk track. I don't talk to too many folks inside the VA, but you two might know a little bit more than me.
I could talk on the. I can't speak specifically on the brain trauma piece, but I can talk about trauma in general broadly, and how just widely misunderstood it is in our, not just our medical system, but again, our society. Um, we, in the military, we refer specifically to a qualifying incident. So this is the thing that happened that gave you the PTSD that made you sick, right? Um, it's really not that simple. Our bodies do an amazing job at clearing trauma. This is a remarkable machine that our meat suit that we're part of. Um, do an amazing job of clearing trauma, and even clearing trauma in series. So if it happens again and again and again, as long as there's time in between to clear it. But if there's not, and you start to have residual traumas, well, it's a reinforcing loop. Our ability to process trauma diminishes as trauma builds up in our system. So quickly that can overwhelm the system, and then you're stuck in a trauma response, which is the fight, flight, fight, or freeze, which so many veterans don't realize they're stuck in. That's just what they know as their normal, and for them, that's a diminished response flexibility. That means that a certain stimuli happens, someone cuts you off in traffic. There's a very small list of reactions that you're going to turn to, because that's what you know. This is what you're thinking. You don't have the ability to access the higher level functional thinking that can help, that makes you creative and ability to have decisions and things. And so you just start to live life like that, and that affects your relationships and so many other things. Well, that doesn't happen unless you've been exposed to complex trauma. So one of my arguments is that we know this thing is PTSD. Well, it's not just a thing. There had to have been multiple things compounding over your lifetime. Otherwise, your system would have been able to adequately clear it. And so, for all these, in the standard medical world, you're looking at the physicians, the psychologists are looking at that qualifying incident and trying to heal that, trying to address that. And there's some things that are pretty effective. EMDR is pretty effective. Stellate ganglion block, transcranial magnetic stimulation. These things can help, but they're working largely on that single incident and ignoring all the other things that may have happened over time. And that's where psychedelics can be so beneficial, is that they address that whole issue, with a full system reset. And I think that's one of the things that we want to help people understand is you don't have to have a single really bad qualifying incident in order to be able to receive help and healing from this kind of stuff. Because chances are, like, you have enough compounded other things in your life that the impact has been just as big. So, it's big in the. I started out in the as a Marine, a conventional Marine, and then transitioned to a Marine Raider later on. And there's the Pogue versus Grunt argument. So those who are the infantrymen, the operators versus the admin guys. And so many of like the admin guys or the rear guys don't feel like, and women feel like they don't deserve to get help because I wasn't exposed in the same way that these other guys were. Well, that's not the way it works either. They tend to be impacted even more greatly because they don't have the same support networks that the frontline guys had, that the infantry squads had, the ability to, after the thing happens, the negative thing, the bad thing happens, to sit around and talk about it and kind of decompress with each other and use that team and that brotherhood to help them heal. So the whole notion of relative trauma, my thing isn't as bad as your thing. It's just wrong. And I think as long as we're stuck in that, we prevent people from getting the healing that they need and that they can receive.
Is there anything people can do to kind of share that vision a little more? Say you're listening to this podcast, you're just out of basic, like what might people? I hope that's the case, by the way. But what can people do to like prep maybe? Make a culture of that.
Yeah, well, those of us who are in a position to put the word out can just share that you're worth it. You rate it. If you feel like you need the help, then ask for the help because it's here for you. I don't care how much of an admin guy or whatever you like. This is something that everybody deserves. Your natural state should be joy and happiness, not pain and suffering and misery. And I think we can help to share that.
Agreed. Yeah, I was reading recently somewhere that drone pilots aren't necessarily having those qualifying incidents, so aren't necessarily being able to get that kind of care or even like disability at the end. And that's like pretty gnarly to, exclude large swaths of folks, like admin and otherwise, right? Yeah, it's a lot. And we've got to do a lot of reframing. Go ahead.
I would also say of like take your health in your own hands. Obviously work with the professionals, all that kind of stuff, but be informed. Don't go about it, like just because you read MD or the subject matter expert, but also, understand what's out there, do your research, all that kind of stuff, inform yourself. That's how it's oddly enough. I mean, like the beginning of your question, the VA is coming around. People I talk to, they are more conscientious of head trauma and some other things, and there are different modalities. The problem how the VA is structured is each hospital is somewhat independent, and so what might be accessible at one is not necessarily at the other. And then there's just a lot of bureaucracy. Like oftentimes you have to fail other therapies to get in this therapy. And for somebody in a trauma state, that just makes it more and more impossible. So they are catching on. Even from when I got out, it's a slow moving giant. It's a system. It's not going to be nimble on its feet. We have to understand the systems we're dealing with. But what you see is, we kind of expect the VA to be the innovation arm or the voice of the veterans, and it's just not built that way. And most of the innovation arm, which should be there for veterans, is not there. It generally comes privately, and more often than not through nonprofits. And the general course of that happening is somebody goes through something or is exposed through something or exposed to something, and then suffers, and then they either start the nonprofit or their family, generally the spouse, starts the nonprofit, and it takes them years, if not decades, to get attention and figure out the alternative. So a lot of the innovation actually comes from the nonprofit side, which is, a testament to the veteran community spirit of, like, they're doing pretty advanced research and leading the way into healthcare in a lot of ways, but it also shouldn't necessarily be the burden. And by the time they get to that spot, 10 years, there's a lot of suffering that happens, and that's the best case scenario before things actually change. So I mean, like with head trauma, our friends at Warrior Angel Foundation, they pretty much, with a doctor, found that hormone replacement therapy helps that a lot. There's other organizations that do hyperbaric oxygen. There's others that do TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. All of this is like being pushed on the outside. And I don't think that should be the case, just because it's needless suffering for long years, a lot of wasted resources, just, building these things. Whereas our hope and our expectation coming out is, oh yeah, the VAs get hundreds of billions of dollars. They should know this shit already, right? They should be the leaders. They should be advanced to this. It shouldn't be, dumb Jesse Gould and be like, hey guys, look at the research over here, and so that's one of those systematic things that, if we are going to change the system, I think we finally have a leg up on psychedelics. There's a lot more work to be done, but this pattern is going to continue. There's going to be the next generation of veterans are going to be exposed to the next sort of things or next sort of trauma, and then it's going to be sort of this repeat cycle. And so we need to not only look at right now, but also end that cycle. And that's kind of, unfortunately, where the only people who can effectively make that change are also the least reliable people in the country in the form of politicians. So we have to figure out how to pressure them and get that voice and get them to back up saying they support the troops. And that's always a tricky thing. But I do think with how overwhelming the support is coming for psychedelics, I think we have a unique opportunity here to push for more.
That's amazing. Yeah, I see that there's continued effort and a continued push on the federal side, and I really am hopeful there. But like you say, it's slow. This is a huge institution. We're the third largest country by population. We often forget that, I think. And we've got to really, put that in perspective. And the VA is, doing so much healthcare work. It's hard to, innovate when you're kind of overwhelmed as an institution, I think, for sure. Yeah. So
they're
it's coming,
having trouble
I hope.
keeping up. There's bottlenecks in terms of there's just not really enough therapists. I mean, the point that General Marty Steele pointed out was, and he was 3-star general, tapped to be the head of the VA a few times, so he knows it in and out. I think he probably refused for obvious reasons. He has his own reasons, but the therapists, the doctors, they get 15 to 20 minutes per veteran. In and out, in and out. Just there's the last estimate, which is super conservative and super wrong, was that there's, in the last 20 years of war, at a minimum 500,000 veterans diagnosed with PTSD. Many more with head trauma, many more with toxic exposure and depression and all sorts of different sleeping issues. And the vast majority of those, probably more than 2/3, are not getting affected or are not reacting to the therapy in a very effective way.
That's brutal. Wow. Really important to note. So on a lighter note, Jesse, I heard you recently had a photo shoot with a popular magazine.
I was joking about the shirtless. I think there was a shirtless one, but it wasn't me jogging on the beach without my shirt.
That's great. But you got a feature in a big magazine. Is that your first a big magazine feature?
I we Heroic Hearts has been featured in a few. I think this is the first like just profile of with my face at the forefront, which is an honor and also scary to see. Uh,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, so it was men's health. The journalist reached out to us. Yeah, very fortunate. He did a great write up. Just kind of went over our work, some of the stories of the landscape there, and yeah, just released today. And so right in time for Veterans Day. And the hope of all this is normalizing it, right? If more people see uh, average dude with psychedelics around his name, then I think it becomes a little bit less stigmatized or scary.
Every single time. Like we can learn a lot from a lot of rights movements. Like the more we come to the fore and say, hey, these are our problems, and like this is who we are, and this is how we got our healing. Like that's going to really help the conversation. So if you're in a position to like come out about your use or your healing or a family members, like please people do that. And it's kind of why we need to be in these magazines to get more exposure. And it's every time it gets easier for the next
We
person.
we've had so many stories of people coming back, and I'll caveat with saying like if you've had your own experience, don't push your family members to do it, or don't push anybody. Like
Right.
they'll come to it on their own. We've had a lot of people that come home, and they drastically change your life for the better. And next thing you know, like various family members are booking their trip to Costa Rica or, finding their mushroom supply. A woman on our team, on our board, Juliana, her family is more conservative, and they've really changed their views on this.
That's fantastic. Zach, have you seen stuff like this too?
Yeah, I think storytelling is so much of a big part of what we do. And, we think about, so for Heroic Hearts, our secondary objectives are research, education, and advocacy. And when you look at those three words, you think kind of people tend to just go straight to the formal aspect of each of them, without realizing that part of our education campaign is just storytelling, just encouraging the veterans who've had successes with our programs to go and, if they feel comfortable, tell their stories and live their stories and let others see and experience the change that they've gone through. Um, because it's not just the formal education piece. It's us educating family members and friends and supporters of veterans that this could potentially be a healing medicine for them. It's educating providers that this could possibly be a thing that can help them. Um, and then there's the educating lawmakers on the advocacy part. And it's research isn't just in a clinic. It's open. It's everyday life, and the people are telling the stories. They're getting their data out there, and that's helping to change minds.
Oh, this is a good segue. So I've have the understanding that Heroic Hearts is participating in helping collect data for publication. So actual scientific work is being informed by Heroic Hearts. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'll say at the top of that, we're actually recruiting actively right now. One of the partnerships is University of Texas Austin, the Dell Medical School. They formed the first psychedelic center in Texas, which is a weird thing to say, but pretty exciting at the same time. And so they were partnered with them to do a three-part study. One with Gold Star Wives. So for people who don't know the term, Gold Star Wives or Gold Star Mothers means the wives and mothers of a fallen soldier. So somebody that died in combat, but also in the case of this study, we work with soldiers that took their own lives, and so the spouses of those soldiers. So psilocybin for those Gold Star wives that are experiencing depression after the loss and the follow up. Ayahuasca with combat veterans, and then ibogaine with special operations veterans, and that one will also look at traumatic brain injury. So we're working with them. The Mission Within, which has the ibogaine clinic in Mexico, um, and so yeah, that's an amazing study, especially with that. And what I'll say is we're recruiting right now. So for Gold Star Wives, so if they're interested, in that study. You're going through university; it's all safe. If you've experienced depression, we're actively recruiting right now. But then beyond that, we've worked with the University of Georgia, a personality change study with Brandon Weiss. He's published in Nature magazine. The results of that showed a significant reduction in neuroticism with ayahuasca. He's also releasing some more publications. We did some follow-up studies. University of Colorado Boulder, we're doing a gut microbiome study. We designed another study with Imperial College of London in partnership with the UK branch. And so that is psilocybin for head trauma. So it's an interesting study because, one, kind of what we mentioned, most of the psychedelic studies are specifically focused on the psychiatric side of things, of like how does this affect depression, PTSD, all that kind of stuff. And generally speaking, there's kind of been a firewall between psychiatric and physiological sort of issues. Oftentimes the head trauma crowd doesn't interact with the depression crowd. But as we've seen, that head trauma can cause a lot of the symptoms that are seen in depression, PTSD, suicidal ideation. So we're studying the effects of psilocybin on veterans with recorded brain injury from their time. And part of it, the cohort's going to go to Jamaica. So the American vets are going to go to Jamaica, go through ceremony, and we'll document it with various metrics, including EEG. The UK veterans are going to go to the Netherlands for the same sort of study, and hopefully we'll get some Canadian veterans in the mix. So an interesting sort of international observational study to test that. Some smaller coordinations here and there, which we're pushing forward with Phil Wolfson for doing sort of a group ketamine therapy, like community aspect dynamic. And then I know not a study yet, but Hannah McLean over at Soundmind, we're trying to figure out ways of working with her to also develop more sort of community pieces.
That's fantastic. I love hearing that. And I love that there's going to be some research tied in, so it can hopefully help more people in time once we know what works, right? So that's fantastic. Y'all are doing that.
Yeah, the benefit of it's kind of like what Zach said is like clinical is one dynamic of it, but observational studies often kind of get cast aside because it's not the golden standard of double blind and producing a prescribable pharmaceutical. But the value of observational is, one, you can do it far cheaper but still get very prominent results, but you're also testing in real world settings, which is valuable in its own right. It allows us to be a little bit more creative in terms of you're not going to see a ayahuasca gut microbiome FDA clinical study in probably our lifetime. So the fact that we're able to kind of figure out how this works on a more holistic basis is sort of what we can do. We can be a little bit more scrappy in that sort of research stuff, and then hand it off, for the bigger people to explore more if they find it interesting.
Something else interesting on the data side. So like we said a few minutes ago, we believe data tells stories and stories change minds, right? So kind of the result of about a year-long initiative for our organization was talking to the other groups that are working in the same space and trying to come to an agreement that we all will start using the same tools, the same data measures, right? Because if we're all measuring with different sticks, it doesn't matter if we can't, if our results are apples and oranges. And this is important for us, but it's also important for us to be able to compare our results to what's being seen at the VA and other accepted medical systems. So implementing a system of vetted evaluation and assessment tools that are given at a set protocol to each of our veterans. This is something we worked on over the past year, and then partnered with a digital data platform called Maya Health that will enable us to create the largest volume of veteran psychedelic data, basically, that's ever been collected. So as this body of data grows, we'll eventually be able to compare the efficacy of the treatments that we're putting veterans through to what the VA is doing. And that's where we really start to make, I believe, a powerful impact. and show what's possible with psychedelic medicines.
Right. That's amazing. I've had this idea for some sort of coalition so we can stop really doing double work in the nonprofit space. And this kind of using similar measures seems like really in line with that, because why fight when we could be collaborating and helping more people more quickly, right? That would be really a cool project eventually. I hope to see it in the future. I've planted some seeds here and there. Maybe it'll happen.
Fighting's so much fun, Joe. Why would you want to stop it?
It is. It really is. It's a certain kind of rush, isn't it? Um, so gut biome. Is there any kind of provisional data or theory around ayahuasca and gut biome improvement?
We haven't released, or we haven't. They're still analyzing the results. I think we're actually going to do a follow-up study with Simon Rufel and the Ayahuasca Foundation in Peru, and they're going to base it off our data. I think it's as with all, everybody's super busy, so we'll let you know once that's ready to go. But the idea is, I mean, the original idea is, if you go to an ayahuasca ceremony, there's like some sort of like monster going on in your stomach, and it's the concept was like, hey, this has to be doing something, it has to be messing up, and the science behind it was, there's the Vega, for I could be completely speaking, but I think I know what I'm talking about. So let's go with that. The vagus nerve connects the stomach to the brain, and they've shown that your gut microbiome and what you eat, which affects that, directly affects some emotions or has a immediate connection. So some treatments actually for people is eating healthier or changing their system or seeing what they're reactive to, sort of reducing inflammatory states, all that kind of stuff, and that actually has a lot of decent backing. And so the idea too is that a lot of veterans, through exposure, through stress, through what they eat, like in MREs and stuff like that, all that stuff's not really great. And with inflammation, it tends to be sort of a self-feeding sort of loop. Is once you get into this, it like that stress builds the bad bacteria, and as well as other things, like if you're more depressed and you drink more, then that builds more. It's that's why trauma states or certain states can be so hard to get out of, because there's just so many compounding factors, which again makes it ridiculous to just give you one pill and expect everything to be better. And so that was sort of the understanding. I mean, it's a very complex thing. It's very hard to control, but the idea of, at least where we can, is just get more data points. Like, what are we seeing? Can we see at least some sort of inclination in the data that is worth exploring more? It's a little bit more of a cast a wide net and see if there's anything interesting, and then we can go into there a little bit more. So it's funny, of like early on, with Kate, actually, with Kate Pate, kind of had this hypothesis, and so we discussed it. And so it was essentially us just buying like these microbiome kits and taking it over and convincing people that it wasn't weird giving their poop samples before and after ceremony, and then like figuring out ways to smuggle other people's poop back to Peru. And we worked with we our first big grant was from this company called Ubiome, and so I was super excited because it was early on in the company, and they offered to give us $50,000 worth of kits. And so, like still in the phase of digging out coins from the couch, that was like a huge sort of win of like, hey, we're something, we're doing something. Somebody's interested in our, cockamamie schemes. And then we got the first data back, sent it in, waiting for the results. They had a really cool interface that like showed you all this kind of stuff. And then I wake up one morning to the news that their offices were raided by the FBI for, I don't know, some sort of improprietary fund embezzling or something like that. And so that ended the company and that data. I think we still got the raw data, but the idea and the inclination. And it's also, it's I think research should be interesting as well. Like, if something grabs your eye and there's actually some basis for it, it doesn't need to all be, super sterile. Like, what does this do to this? Like, it can be more of a populist kind of thing. Like, oh, this is interesting. Let me see what this says. I'm interested in health and gut microbiome, and so there's just a lot of points to it. And so I'm pretty excited to see, even if it doesn't result in anything. At least it's more data is better than no data.
Wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, we need to start somewhere. This is gut research is so early, but we really need to lean in and get more data as quickly as possible. I think gut brain axis was a big presentation at Miami. I saw some stuff there, and I were you on that panel? Maybe
The which this Miami?
gut brain axis. I think in Wonderland.
No, I was on a veteran one.
Okay. Yeah, I got too distracted. I think I saw one talk the whole time, but yeah, it was a good time. So, um, also we talked about a documentary that might be coming out. I think that's obviously amplifies the hell out of storytelling. But what's going on there?
Yeah, so this was a long time in the making. It was 2020. Um, we've done these things called sort of executive retreats, which was sort of an idea of, we normally do the veteran retreats, but especially early days, it was hard to get funding, as a not, small nonprofit. And so one of the ideas we had was to have some retreats where we kind of mixed in veterans with potential donors or people that could get our name out. Obviously, balance, make sure that they're all like minded, but kind of mix it up so that we kind of expand the message beyond. Because most of the people that we serve in the best case scenario was a group of veterans. They go home, they live their normal lives. They tend to not be the most active, except for a few cases on social media, right? And so the message from them doesn't really permeate that far beyond their micro communities, which is great. So we're just looking to expand the message to bring more support and bring more awareness around this. And so we were fortunate. That's actually how Zach and I met, through a mutual friend, and he can tell that part of it. But met him, another veteran, came across Daniel Carcillo, the hockey player, as well as Riley Cote, another hockey player. And they both had kind of started their journey. And then uh, an executive who does stem cells. And through Daniel's connections, we found some people who are willing to, Brandon Boulay, who was willing to film it, along with his assistant. And we were like, oh, well, let's make something of this. It could be sort of a unique dynamic. Um, and so we all came together, not really knowing what it was. Dr. Bronner's was kind enough to help provide funding for it, as well. I think Dan also contributed some funding for it. So big thanks to both of them. And so got the filming there. Amazing experience. Everybody walked away, uh, you know, um, with their own impacts. Both Dan and Riley became um, their own advocates in the space, and obviously Zach's here. COVID happened, life happened with Brandon. Everybody got busy, so it just kind of got delayed from various aspects. But everything's meant to come out when it's supposed to. So I think now is actually probably the best time for it to come out. And so finally got the final copy. The actual release will be on Veterans Day on Friday. We'll release the trailer tonight on our well, I mean, people won't see this till on Veterans Day. So if you're watching this on Veterans Day, you can watch the full, and if you want to watch the trailer, you have that ability as well. But it'll be about 20 minutes, 18 to 20 minutes, so easily digestible, and it just goes over these different stories, people from different walks of life, different traumas, different reasons for being there. But all, I think, walking away with some more sense of themselves, and also more of a community. I still keep up with most of those people to this day. Yeah, Zach, I don't know if you have anything from your perspective how you got roped in.
Yeah. So that was my first psychedelic experience. I was there as a very much as a veteran in need. Um, I think one of the biggest things it showed to me, or this is kind of in the earlier days of my journey, is how similar we can be to so many others without realizing it, right? So veterans think, we're this special, super amazing thing, and we're different than jocks, we're different than executives or civilians or whatever. But you look at certain population groups, especially high functioning or high performing athletes and executives and veterans, and there's just so many striking similarities. And for so many people in that community, there was something that happened in their developmental years that made them feel the need to overachieve, overperform, overprotect, overdefend, uh, and that need motivated them and drove them to these super high heights. But then for a lot of them, they just got to a point where they couldn't outrun it anymore. And that was me, and that's what I found happened to be a similar case to the others in this group. And so it was just the perfect combination of stories, I guess, that came together. And for me, at least, that meant that for the first time, and as long as I could remember, I was able to walk in the room and I felt safe, and I was able to let myself go as deep and dark or whatever as I needed to, because I knew that the others around me had been through something similar, their own kind of way, and they were there for me and they'd help me through. And I feel like we provided that same kind of defense and protection for everyone else in the group. And so that was firsthand for me. I saw what was possible with Heroic Hearts Project, and that became a huge factor in how I left the business world and came to help this organization, because I saw this is the thing that works, and we need to help scale it and grow it and increase access to this programs like ours, so that people can heal.
Beautiful. Yeah, I love that. And it's the time is now. We've got so much good momentum, and I don't think there's room to backslide, honestly. I could see a little bit of political pushback, but really I think this momentum is going to just keep helping more people, and more people are going to keep sharing, right? And storytelling like this project is going to keep helping.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, I see no end in sight. I'm an optimist that way, I guess.
Yeah, so anybody listening right now on Veterans Day, pause, watch the documentary for 18 minutes, and then come back, and you'll be all caught up. But yeah, I agree. I always get that question of like, do you think this is going to go back to the 60s and 70s? And I think what I tell people is like, we're completely, you have to understand the context of where all that happened. It was the first time this kind of came into the culture. There was a lot of push for the drug war. There was a lot of push from the government to control different, it was a little bit more chaotic. Uh, Generally speaking, our generation is coming into more of the authority position. We're not as stigmatized by it. The veterans our age tend to be more like, hey, if it works, it works. At the end of the day, too, I mean, the internet's not going to forget. It was, I think, much easier to suppress information back in the day. So, like, we're not going back. I mean, I think my biggest concern going forward is what tends to happen is half measures and lackluster policy, which I've already seen is like, okay, we know this is coming, so let's do sort of the bare minimum to say that we support this, to feel good about ourselves, but actually not do anything. So, I mean, we saw that in California. We had a bill, a lot of momentum, and it was basically it was going through different houses and all this kind of stuff. I think I had to go through. I'm wrong on this, but it had to go through like the house, like
There was some
a
sort of
health
review
assessment.
committee. I have no idea what it's
Yeah, yeah.
called, but
It
they
had
just
like
blew it up, right?
a medical review committee, and that committee, even though we had probably pretty good chances in going through the House in California, they just said, no, 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 let's take this great bill, gut it, and let's make it another generic research bill that won't see results for the next 10 years, kicks the can, doesn't do anything, but they can all pat themselves on the back of, back in my day, I supported psychedelic medicine, and that's kind of my biggest fear.
Mm. So I guess as a hedge, and we're a little early because the results aren't final yet. Colorado has it appears to have voted this whole decriminalization legalization bill in Prop 122. And have you done any thinking about that? I know it's new, but maybe you were planning ahead a little bit of what that could mean for Heroic Hearts.
Let's go for it, Joe. It passed. Woo!
It passed. It did. It's like 51%. Yeah, I'm pumped.
Yeah, so Hero Carts was we've done a lot of the different policies, so we were sort of the nonprofit veteran face of that bill. If you're in Colorado, I hope our commercials didn't overwhelm you too much. Apparently, a lot of them saw that, but they seem to be good commercials and seem to be effective. Um, One, it just pushes the needle forward. I think there's a lot of differences with cannabis, but I think this is one of the similarities. I remember when Colorado and some other states were first, or like Denver was first thinking about like legalizing cannabis, right? And all the naysayers were essentially saying the city was going to burn down in a cannabis smoky sort of flame, and society was going to go backwards and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, there was like upticks and this or that maybe initially, but life in Denver, actually more people moved to Denver. The economy has been booming. Life generally, for the most part, you can speak better to this, continued on as normal. I don't think there's anything abnormal about it besides probably a few more people smoking pot or admitting that they smoke pot. And so I think these kind of things just show the opposition that, hey, this is not the worst thing in the world. All the kids are not going to be high on mushrooms after this passes. And actually, a lot of people might actually get care and health. Um, and that's the other thing is, if it passes with 51%, we have to do a better job educating. We have to, there's still 49 in the population. We don't want to, be uh, kept out of this, but I do highly suspect. People also have to understand there's a 2-year wait until they figure out like how this policy works and rules and regulations and training and sourcing and all that kind of stuff. So it's not just like instantaneously you're going to have access to psilocybin. Decriminalization will happen pretty quickly, but actually going to a therapist to get psilocybin will take a little bit longer, which is great because that shows control and that we're doing things intelligently. But I do think the 49%, after a year or two, they're going to be there at the clinics too, asking for psilocybin. They're going to see like trauma does not. It's not one party or the other, one belief or the other. It's pretty universal, and so I think once more people see that, hey, there's this effective care, they're going to be there too, and the proof is there. The proof is in the substance itself, and something like Colorado, where we see that and it becomes more normalized, helps the rest of the country. I can't tell you how many like conservative people who were super anti-drug I've talked to, and like kind of little whisper of like, hey, I tried microdosing, So microdosing, I think, has kind of got to that more like normalized level. Like I know a lot of old school people who would never dream of smoking pot now do it to go to sleep or help with pain, So it's those baby steps. I mean, sort of the macro thing. I think Zach can talk to this in terms of our bigger goal in terms of localized community, which is something potentially we can start experimenting in Oregon and Colorado, depending on how the rules and regulations fall.
Yeah, as access increases in these places here in the U.S., it just means our mission expands then to figure out what can we do to to create what we're calling kind of a framework of support to ensure that the psychedelics are being maximized and used safely and effectively by the populations that need them. So, if you look at us at Heroic Hearts as an organization, our mission, our goal was never to be able to provide every veteran that needs it a plane ticket to Peru to go do ayahuasca. That's not logistically or financially or visually supportable. But what we can do is provide those who are in dire need. We can those who need the extra handholding. We can help them to get to those sorts of retreats. But for others, it's how can we work within the frameworks of the laws to provide the support that veterans need? How can we educate them? So if they're gonna use psychedelics on their own, how can we ensure that they're doing it safely in order to maximize the effect? That they work with a guide or that they set intentions, and there are all these things that they can do, and we feel like that can be most effective if we base it in communities. So you take a population that largely due to their illness has been isolating, pushing everyone away, and just sitting back and looking at how amazing everyone else's life is while theirs continues to deteriorate. Well, we plug them back into a community, bring them in, and help them to heal together. That's a powerful thing to realize that communities that were traumatized together, they heal better together because you then have the ability to discuss the things that you're going through, the things that you're experiencing, the things that you experienced previously, the things that you're experiencing in your healing journey, and that conversation is very powerful in helping you to get to the next step. And we feel like that can best be done by plugging vets back into their communities.
I love that. Right. These folks have been abstracted from their community due to disease, and they really need to come back. And that's kind of how I speak about the psychedelic healing thing largely too. It's, we have all these people who can't contribute in the way they want to or deserve to be able to contribute in. And, once we get all these people back, we're going to be in a really great spot as a globe, I think. That's, not to mention just alleviating the immediate suffering, but getting these A players back on the team is a big deal. And I can't wait for that.
Yeah, and I think I mean, there's good and bad with everything, but one of the ways the U.S. was designed, and I think one of the beauties is that there is this differentiation between the federal government and states' rights, and at some points either one flexes it, but with cannabis and psilocybin and unfortunately some other stuff, or fortunately with some other stuff, states have kind of flexed their muscle a little bit. But that does allow for a very unique testing opportunity. Each state's a little bit different. They're diverse. They're going to have different laws. And psychedelics, it's not just the replacement for SSRIs or other medications. MDMA a little bit. There's kind of more of that therapeutic one-on-one kind of thing. But hallucinogenics like psilocybin and ayahuasca and DMT in general, um, they take a different approach. It really relies on the self healer, really relies on preparation for the internal journey. There's still a place for coaching and the therapist, but they have to understand what they're dealing with. It's such a ineffable, which is the word that always comes out, experience, that it's a different sort of thing, and it's not this reductionist mentality that is pretty prominent, or the majority of medicine, where this chemical interacts with this receptor, and we know this is. I take Tylenol, I don't have a headache, right? This is working on a much more complex complex system. We have to be comfortable with some unknowns around it. And with an ayahuasca, there's a lot of metaphors, and there's a lot of I have no idea what that was. Your therapist is not going to know what it was, but maybe it'll present itself. And so this is this and Oregon are a good testing ground. The research bills are great. Again, that's going to back up what I think a lot of people already assume, and that's kind of how the system works. Those are systematic things of okay, we need this proof. Maybe it'll, enlighten us a little bit more how the brain works, and there's a lot of benefit to that. But we also need that ground proof of realistically, how does this work? And so we need these testing grounds as this expands, and understand how does psychedelics look like in the U.S. One, we don't have the culture really for it. We don't have the traditions, so we need to sort of create our own, or blend and see how this works with us. But also, it's currently a little bit at heads with the current medical model in a lot of different ways. And so these will be explorations of how does psychedelics work in a community system, how do they work with a medical system, how do they work potentially with insurance, potentially with doctors, facilitators, therapists. All these are kind of unknown quantities. And then the last thing, most importantly, and I think I mentioned this before, we don't have the infrastructure currently. We need people that are trained. We need people that are comfortable. And because of the laws and because people don't want to recognize the writing on the wall that these are probably coming, we are just grossly unprepared. We were already unprepared just with traditional therapists. Like the VA is overwhelmed with the number of veterans and therapists, and now we're bringing this whole new sort of way of treating people. We need to get on it to train these people, and so it's going
I'm
to
here
happen
for
in
it.
these states. Yeah, but that's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we're just going to get caught in a very unprepared situation, which is not good for anybody.
Or we'll try and pigeonhole it back to a pharmacological model where it's here, take this pill and you'll be better, without realizing like, no, man, there's more to it. There's more to it than that.
I started getting some physicians telling me recently that SSRIs in some cases I think they were saying blanketly, are unethical to prescribe, which was a pretty mind-blowing thing for me to hear from a doctor at a big deal university. So, I think they have a place, but I think they're not used right most of the time. But
Yeah, I think they can definitely save lives. As far as we know, I think they will be rudimentary as we get to know more. But right now, I mean, like kind of what Zach was saying, like our current medical model is you go to the doctor every weekend, every Monday, and you're like, I just have this massive headache and I'm super dehydrated. And so they give you the IV, they give you the Tylenol. You go back, and they just like, what symptoms you have. And what you find out is this guy drinks his life away over the weekends and has a hangover. And so instead of like, okay, well, maybe stop drinking and you won't have the headache. But that's what we do. We treat, oh, you have this headache. Well, why did you have that headache? And so, yeah, we can take Tylenol, maybe feel better after a hangover, but is that addressing the reason you're getting there? And so that's sort of the perspective we need to change.
wholeheartedly agree here. Yeah, medicine's just getting to this point where integrative healthcare makes sense, and this is a big part of that. So we're helping accelerate that shift and improving healthcare overall by doing this big push here with psychedelics. So I truly believe we're going to be revolutionizing healthcare. It's going to not look anywhere similar, I believe, in 10 years. But we've got a lot of work to do in the meantime. So I'm glad you guys are on the team here. Glad y'all are out there and trying to really push this and help a lot of folks. So any kind of final things we want to shout out or mention before we wrap here?
Yeah, I think I was able to address most of the things I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, and always appreciate talking to you, Joe. And yeah, from our side, like if veterans are in need, they can always go to our website and fill out our application. We're in the process of revamping systems, and there's a lot of demand, but we're working night and day to help. Other great organizations, like I mentioned before, Veteran Solutions, they're on the front lines too. Veterans of War with Wiley Gray. Like I said, Dr. Bronner's has been super helpful for us. Just a lot of great people. And then also just want to shout out Brett Waters, Reason for Hope. They've been doing some great stuff in terms of policy, like on the federal scale. And he's been uniquely able to build this sort of veteran coalition, kind of what we alluded to before, Joe, is I think we kind of get single-sided. It's often easier to disagree than agree or let our egos get in the way. And so Reason for Hope's been doing an amazing job just bringing in the veteran coalition, which I haven't seen since starting this. And I think a lot of people who've been in longer haven't seen either. We tend to kind of get in our scarcity mentality and lumped in one. So just want to give them the shout out as well. All great organizations, many more. Fireside Project are doing great things. I'm forgetting the vast majority of them, but
We can't even name them all. There's so many.
Yeah, and so many great people. Shakruna, I just saw Bia. She'll be pissed if I don't shout out Shakruna, but yeah, I mean they all have their spot and they're all working together. And so just always and you guys as well. Psychedelics Today and your integration course. I've been hearing a lot of great stuff about it. So it's amazing to be just a piece of this puzzle and working with this coalition.
Yeah, it's such a cool project to be involved with. Thank you both. Happy Veterans Day. Thank you both for all the work you've been doing and your time in the military. Really appreciate it, and just really hope we can do more together. Yeah, just always want to support Heroic Hearts, and yeah, please keep it going.
Appreciate
Thanks,
you. Check out our documentary. But yeah, thanks, Joe.
You got it. Until next time, guys.
What did it take for me to get here in the high jungle doing ayahuasca?
Ayahuasca is a powerful medicine that, if we're prepared to be really honest with ourselves on a deep level, can show us the depths of who we truly are.
Stigmas become very deeply ingrained, especially those backed by fear. It can be a very hard thing to challenge and to change.
It's dangerous to expand your mind. It's easier to live in a bubble.